for Sustainability Circular Industry Talks. And today I'm very glad to welcome Ksenia Fedorova. Ksenia is an assistant professor at the Leiden University Centre for the Arts in Society. And Ksenia's research is on media art, and she also acts as a curator. In her work, she bridges art, science, and technology. And in the presentation today, she will address how artists and designers generate novel ideas for sustainable and regenerative futures by using science and digital technology. So, Ksenia, I'm very curious to your presentation, and please go ahead.
If you can, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm struggling.
If you succeed in sharing your screen.
Exactly. I haven't used it for a while. I'm so sorry.
Take your time. There's no rush. There's probably still people that want to join the meeting, so no rush.
Oh, embarrassing.
Well, technology sometimes fails all of us.
Yes, but it should be just so simple. I've done before. Now we are back to live teaching, and we don't do
it as often, fortunately.
And otherwise, you can always share your presentation if it's not too big, or in the chat, or send it by email, and then we share it. There's no issue there.
Yeah, if you don't mind, maybe I could do that quickly.
Yeah, if you send it to Elise or to me, then
exactly.
we will try to share.
Just should tell me when to click to change language for the rest.
Yes, I sent it to Elisa. But maybe I'll figure it out. So I have to go to security and privacy settings, and that becomes a bit counterintuitive. Yeah, Elisa, if you could maybe download it, so and I'll start the story then already now. Yes, indeed, I come from the field of humanities and art studies, I would call it so. Yes, thanks. Then you can open the full screen, obviously. Yeah, and this is actually a topic of a new course that I'm offering within the minor, one of the first, or even the first LDE minor that started about 10 years ago, called Responsible Innovation. And yet my own research focus is actually more broadly art and technology, art and science relations. So innovation is something much more applied. And so I see the value of the humanities approach and of this course, and also this contribution within your series, as to introduce us and remind us all of the larger picture of the critical questions, societal, political dimensions, ethical, that we as people, obviously, so should be all aware about. And let me, next slide. Go through what I prepared. So let me begin with why creative visions for regenerative futures. So there is a lot of research, obviously, on these distinctions between sustainable or restorative approaches, and regenerative is one of the more recent ones. That implies basically working with living systems, with more next slide, emphasis on not just basically sustaining the status quo, so not creating damage at the expense of the future populations, but also participating with the environment, using the health of ecological systems as a basis for design. Next slide. my own inspiration to this came. Oh, this is not what I have in my slides. It's strange. I hope I sent the right slides. Yeah, so it came from a project of a dear friend, whom I collaborated with, a leader of a so-called Green World campaign, or Green World, that basically does agroforestry. And he's been doing that for more than 15 years, and I've been observing it for all the time. And indeed, this is one of the obvious, basically, cases for what a regenerative economy, regenerative society can be. So because it involves both literally reforestation, so restoring, regenerating the health of the soil, right? Especially in places where deforestation took place and degraded land is the problem. But also, as we know, so lots of these problems are taking place in the third world, and there, so solutions that are indeed sustainable, so that need to work on a long run, need to be developed, and hence working with community, encouraging them, and not just inspiring, but finding other ways for them to not rely on external Western funding, for instance, but having these systems and projects ongoing. So, for instance, this particular, basically charity, so has a big emphasis on education of kids, and a variety of trees is obviously important, so that it's indeed complementary as to what they grow. Next slide. Yes, so this is a quote from Mark Berish, the founder of Green World Campaign, about what regenerative strategies imply, that they create enabling conditions for whole system healing processes that are non-linear, negentropic, fostering self-emergent processes out of the latent capacities of the system itself. Next. In my course, I also talk about indeed these concepts, like distinctions between sustainability and regeneration, but also obviously because it's a minor on responsible innovation, so we do discuss concrete solutions, and I allude them to this quite inspiring repository available online, and quite a useful, I find, resource for students of all backgrounds with concrete solutions. Yes, so practices, projects, and analysis of the success of those projects all around the world. So it's maybe not as scientific as so many of you are studying here. So, but it gives a nice overview of what's happening in terms of not just critical approaches like what we are mastering here in the field of the humanities and social sciences, but concrete implementation. So obviously what gives us hope. So move on, next slide. So obviously the focus of this talk is the humanities. So here, Elisa, you can go through the points, and I'll be covering them. So I'd like to first start with what a perspective of environmental humanities and cultural studies bring, and then we'll go into more examples from the field of the arts and design. I think it's not really too surprising that obviously the humanities are focusing on the social human dimension, and hence things like environmental justice or the political aspects of the affairs is important. So it's not just about regulation, but also how to include the voices of the marginalized communities, but also of nature itself. Yes, so it's about the novel legal models to include these rights within our conventional systems, and luckily such examples exist. And curiously enough, in places, you might have heard of a famous example of the Holt River in New Zealand that has its representative in the government, but also in Ecuador and in some of other countries in South America. So these all traditional ways of respecting nature, so because they rely on it so much, so they somehow made it indeed into their governmental work. Ecological frame implying basically interconnectedness and respect for indeed this network feedback loops, so that are outside of pure human control. So that's the basis also of this type of approach. Or the notion of posthumanism, I'd like to mention, that implies obviously also opening up to this more than human, but also in sense of what we can learn from how nature operates, but also how it senses, how it makes sense of the world. That's why I'd like to stress this concept of non-human sentience. So I'm not talking about, let's say, cognition or conscience, because, well, it's ongoing discussion, quite an interesting debate, but definitely, obviously, in design and engineering, we do mimic nature a lot, right? So biomimicry is one of the most important methods, and a lot of that has to do not just with shapes and forms, but also with processes and the capacities of other living beings to indeed sense, to process information. And so it's all about exchange as well that we are trying to mimic in a way. So, but again, the gist is that we put ourselves on an equal basis, so with these other beings, be them living or also non-living. Indigenous epistemology is also an ongoingly growing field. So in cultural studies, in philosophy actually as well. So how can we overcome, again, this anthropocentric approach that has been so prevalent within modernity? So principles of rational, objective knowledge within science. Sector, so that can be complemented obviously with other ways of making sense of the world, of creating knowledge. Next. I'd like to move on to, yes, so one other aspect is a feminist perspective that, by the way, doesn't have to do with gender issues at all, but rather with notion of care, of maintaining, of all this invisible work that has to be done after, let's say, technology is introduced. So behind all of this, it's not on the slide, but basically it's a critique of techno-fix types of solutions or techno-solutionism, right? So it's not just technical fix that we want to do, but rather societal, right? So to look into the root types of problems. Next. So what does art and design here add? So here again, we can click on one by one slowly. It offers us a new form of participation in the debates surrounding environmental issues. Art is basically an embodied practice. It engages us into thought through experiences. Sensory experiences, subjective experiences, but it's indeed a complementary type of knowledge that we all have, sometimes called tacit knowledge, like how we learn to ride a bicycle or play piano, or how craftsmen or many people involved into making something for a long time deal with their objects. So they develop this special relationship with the material itself. And so art has a way to kind of translate that through telling stories. Yeah, so these experience-based stories. Next. And very important, obviously, that it creates this not very constrained space for speculations. Sometimes even scientists with PhDs go into the field of art because indeed they want to explore something that the system of science, based on reproducibility of experiments, obviously, on special criteria for publications, doesn't allow them. So, the key question here is, of course, what if? Yes, so we imagine these other types of scenarios that can be totally fictional, can be story-based, where the viewers, readers, and so on, so can really immerse themselves into these alternative ways of future making. Next. Yeah, so in that sense, art and design is not just about raising awareness, but it really helps to shift discursive paradigms. Next. And now I'd like to feature a few of different strategies, so from raising awareness to actually direct interventions through activist, DIY, art and science collaborative practices. So here I'll, next. Sorry for this. This is a bit disturbing because I have quite a lot of slides. So of course, raising awareness is a hugely important contributions of the arts, because it can happen in public spaces and immediately reach out to a lot of people. So like this project by Olafur Eliasson in Paris so this particular picture is from London, but he also did bring it to Paris during the climate discussions there. So to let people literally sense the coolness of the ice, to see how quickly it melts in front of their eyes. Obviously, of course, it raised questions about how environmental is it to bring it, to ship it all away from where it used to be, so this ice, but the artist team actually did calculate the, both sides, yes, so in the outcome somehow overweighted these environmental expenses, so that it still made sense for them to reach out so many people, yes, so with this message. Next. From this, we do go to environmental activism, like urban gardening is a simple example. And Natalie Jeremijenko, I encourage you to check out this project of hers. She's actually a PhD in neuroscience and quite a prolific artist working with science and technologies. And this is basically a social project more than what we're looking at. So yes, it's around basically growing crops, berries, in this case, I think, in urban environment in New York, where she's based. But it's all about also making conversations around how to do that, what the different ways are, and so on. Next. Along the same lines, this is a project about guerrilla grafting and mapping, where fruit trees grow in different cities around the world, and basically for homeless people, for instance, to have access to this free food. Although, again, controversial, because municipalities usually don't like fruit-giving trees in public spaces, since they are also polluting, right? So it this infrastructure is not very sustainable in terms of that there are always people taking care of these trees and collecting fruit in time. Next. Or locally here in Amsterdam, so Urbani Hoeve is a social design lab for urban agriculture that has been working with different communities and educating people around the issues of, let's say, composting and so on, but also doing that in creative ways. Next. Another direction could be appropriate technologies. And this is also a bridge between artistic thinking, but also quite a concrete solution. And I personally encountered it so at one design event, but the inspiration came from Friedrich Hundertwasser, famous whimsical kind of architect, who apparently lived on an island for some time, or somewhere far away in the woods, and developed systems of cleaning his own wastewater with aquatic plants, and that became inspiration for developing public toilets systems where wastewater would also be purified with plants. So, I mean, it may be more a statement than actual project, but that's the whole point, so that you have to start somewhere. So, and we're talking about artistic ideas, driving, encouraging, inspiring some innovation, although then, of course, innovation is something separate than art itself. Next. Another strategy is citizen science, education, and here in the Netherlands, so we have luckily lots of organizations working with these principles, again with communities. Here is a festival that takes place in Amsterdam as well at Mediamatic, or rather it's all around the city, but they are curating that. So how to change our attitude to invasive species like knotweed, for instance. So they invite scientists and designers as well to show what kind of things can be done with this species that usually municipalities just, well, they map them also quite actively in order to get rid of them since they grow way too fast and dominate the local ecosystems, and yet there are ways to do that without completely destroying the plant, but trim it in the right way and then use it for food, for different types of crafts, and so on. Next, so these are, I'm going through this basically directions, yes, so ways of how art and design is dealing with this different problems within environmental crisis and concrete solutions like this one is, of course, loved by students, let's say, from more engineering background or looking for indeed something not just to raise questions, but also in terms of solutions. They may be small scale, but still. So this is one of them by a Berlin-based designer, Farah Peluso, who works with the algae-based materials, creating different types of, or well, at least bases for fabric. Or also on the right side, you can see this concrete product, almost algae-based decoration that can basically purify the air, but also can even glow in the dark in certain scenarios. So if you add the algae that is bioluminescent. Next is also an example around material fabrication by an Australian designer who is also an academic and a thinker. And here she actually asks a question about waste matter as something encouraging us to ask like what matters at all, right? So it's of course a pun. So how can waste matter matter? And the quote on the bottom is from one of her articles. It matters what matters we use to think other matters with. From a famous philosopher, feminist science scholar, Donna Haraway. How can we go beyond the economic value chains to learn to appreciate the inherent values attached to organic matter outputs? So here it's important to stress indeed this concept of mattering on the one hand, but on the other also value that also has double meaning, right? So within conventional economic systems, it's one type of meaning, right? But at the same time, if we think of intrinsic meanings within nature, and that's the whole point, yes, so that they've been suppressed for centuries within our, let's say, Western rationalized systems of knowledge production. So he basically made these next structures, bricks, biobricks out of aquatic cultures like on the one hand, seaweed, so there was a ton of it collected and dried and so on. And on the other hand, oyster shells, also sourced from local farmers, and so on. But again, the interesting point I'd like to make here, following Kate Scardefield, that it's all about how to be tidal also. So not just developing scientific means to indeed to create these new bio-based materials for architecture, construction, but also how to think differently with nature, because in this article featuring in the bottom, she's also talking about all types of problems they encountered that had to do with well, bringing these materials to their own base. Yeah, so obviously you depend on all kinds of weather conditions here, but also when it came to them starting drying it all, then it became a rain season for a while, and unpredictably so. So, and this metaphor of a tide, yeah, so going with the flows, allowing for ebbs and flows in volume, tolerating times of scarcity and abundance. Yeah, so and seeing how that can change even our approaches, yes, to working with these types of matter. Next, I'd like to actually shift to more complex matters, namely some direction called speculative design. So this image actually is also featured on my first slide. So it's a work by Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg, a representative of speculative design, pollinator Pathmaker, which is basically a digital tool that they developed, AI-based as well, to create gardens for endangered pollinating species. So learning, of course, from science about preferences of different species, especially endangered, and then making humans do the work that would accommodate the needs and interests of these other species first. So this maybe is not as speculative as some of the other works I'll feature next. But yeah, that's also an example of how this works. Yeah, and next is actually a whole theoretical base for this whole speculative thinking, developed by Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby, London-based designers, but also more artists or thinkers, because yes, they work in this kind of genre format of design, but at the same time they encourage designers to go beyond, as you can see, so these columns here, A and B, so the more conventional scenarios and functions, let's say, of designers, towards something that they call critical design or speculative design as well. And then the previously featured artist is actually one of their most successful students. So they developed quite a school, the Routledge College of Arts in London, and this is a book featuring all kinds of projects. But as you can see, so this two columns indeed do encourage us to think more critically, speculatively, which is challenging, yes. So because apparently, yes, we still want something more concrete, yes. So what happens after a provocation? So how do we implement it on the ground? Next. They talk about the different types of futures, from the possible, plausible, probable to preferable. And so all these solutions, yeah, or just speculations, they can then be positioned, classified accordingly for different reasons, obviously, depending on what they want to achieve. Yeah, so it's worth taking a look into this whole direction of design theories. And next, I'd like to also feature it's quite a multifaceted project, also built around raising questions and critique, but it's also a different type of medium. In this case, it's a conversation game, at least this one I'm featuring. In fact, well, I have it behind me as well. A whole basically, it's a poster, but it's also a card game where the players talk about these alternatives to the pillars of capitalism. And namely, like short-termism, infinite growth. So you can see this outer circle, overproduction, individualism, and so on. So how to move from these conditions that we are at now, since they dominate, to deep time thinking, to thinking in terms of just innovation, to maintenance. And actually, I was also quite inspired by ongoing agenda within this series, yes, about repair. So obviously maintenance is the same. Or frugality, frugal innovation, right, is also a popular thread within innovation now. Thinking in terms of individualism, collectives. So that's why within the arts, indeed, there is a lot of emphasis on community work or citizen science. Yes, so it's not just about one inventor, a genius, and maybe, yes, an invisible team behind them, but no, it's from the beginning a collective that does the work, right? So it's all about, discussing decisions together. So that's why this conceptual intervention is also designed as a conversation, right? So a polylogue around all these issues, a post-growth toolkit, which also involves lots of interviews by this collective called Disnovation around issues of, basically post-growth, degrowth, and critique of capitalism, I must say. Next, and I will be coming to the end soon. I'd like to feature also a locally based, Rotterdam-based organization called InfoArt. And that developed a principle of art-driven innovation framework. So you can see here a diagram of how they envisioned that to work. So since a few years ago, they became part of consortia at the European Union level as well. For instance, consulting and also hosting projects within a so-called STARTS network, and I'll mention that in a few seconds as well. So how can art drive innovation, basically, is the question here. Next is an example of a kind of report card, that gives you a glimpse of how exactly they approach things, so that indeed you connect an artistic idea, but also with, let's say, the sustainable development goals, and code each of a project at focus via those SDGs. So you can formulate value drivers that can then be used within the innovation field, formulate what a breakthrough is. And so this project, Living Light, for instance, has to do with microbial fuel cells, and it's a way of reducing environmental damage through generating clean energy and treating waste simultaneously at a local scale. Next, at home, so having this, plant generating light. Of course, it's not that much light you'll get from it. So basically collecting electricity from the soil. So, but again, so it's just an idea that can be later scaled up if needed. Next is a slide about, indeed, this big EU-level project that connects science, technologies, and the arts. This is a concrete, umbrella project, a thematic project within this program called Hungry Eco-Cities, having to do with, obviously, the food well, cycles and questions of sourcing and all kinds of ethical questions behind it. And a project next that InfoArt is coordinating with this within this Hungry Cities agenda is a council of foods. So quite well, playful, but also thought-provoking and really wise project, I would say. So it's literally a council. So as you can see, so different foods are representative. So on this discussion board, but it's an interactive website. You can try it. It's working. AI-generated voices of different types of foods, talking about problems of labor, for instance, well, all kinds of issues that are in between of political decision-making around agriculture, urban planning as well, but also the social dimension behind that. And once again, so what I started with, so this perspective of the non-human, yes, of the other beings, so is featured here quite literally, right? So they are invited to be, you know, at the same time, at the same table with decision makers, right? So it's like a tool to encourage politicians to think differently, right, and listen to these voices who can, thanks to AI, actually speak human language as well. Next, I'd like to come to the takeaways. So basically, come to the conclusion that we need, well, lots of things, yes, and one of them is a new type of theory approach to well, solving this environmental crisis, and thinking not just in terms of solutions, but in terms of questions to ask. So to analyze, to criticize, disrupt perhaps the current practices, and be exposed to problems. Staying with the Trouble is the title of Donna Haraway's famous book, for instance. So we do want to be empowered, obviously, and I hope that some of these projects did have that message. So to fight social injustice, many artists in the activist trend obviously do care about that a lot. So enhance diversity and start grassroots activism in order to reclaim agency. Next. Yeah, so as I hoped I could show you, so there are many creative ways to locate these questions on the ground. Thank you so much for your attention. So now I'm open to questions.
Oh, Rudy, you're muted.
Yes, I was talking but muted, so you didn't hear me. I just thank you, Ksenia, for your talk. I think it's very interesting. It's also a lot of different ways to approach quite large variety of issues, I would say. So I guess there will be some questions. And if they're not, I would like to start with.
There is one from.
Oh yes,
from Ellen, I think
then
first.
I'll start with you, Ellen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ksenia. It's very interesting to see this scope of activities. Like myself, I'm teaching organization in the cultural and creative industry. So my question relates to that. Like, is the scope that you show us, is this something that originates in visual arts? And is this something that we can situate like in museum or gallery contexts? And also, like, I'm interested also in the financing and funding of these projects. Are these things that are operating also in the traditional art market for contemporary arts, or is it mostly based on funding from the European Commission, for example? So I'm interested in this, the contextual aspect of these things.
Yes, thanks. Good question. Well, the first part of that was about whether it's only visual arts or more than that. And in fact, indeed, the arts is a broad field, so it doesn't have to be visual and fine arts, but the whole field of culture involving also literature, let's say science fiction, if we're talking about future scenarios and speculation. So there are plenty of stories that, as we know, historically did encourage lots of scientists and technologists to, well, actually create these, spaceships to the moon and so on, or science fiction in film, or games, as well as quite a powerful cultural phenomena. But indeed, in my personal work and basically what conventionally arts, so fine arts stand for, is something that can be featured in museums, galleries. Indeed, it doesn't have relation to the market in a sense of being commercialized and bought and sold. Some pieces could be, but that's another conversation, because lots of these, some of the projects are activist projects that I showed, right? So obviously you cannot sell that, right? Because it's a performance and participatory. But it's actually an interesting idea of how to create this loop also with collectors and so on. So why can't they buy, let's say, an idea and let people be paid for participating in certain activities like that? But usually art, science-intensive art is quite hard to maintain as well. Even for the museums, there is a whole field of, let's say, conservation of media art. So I would say it's what I was talking about. So it's not really collected, but some, let's say, speculative design pieces, they could be. So they are thought-provoking, but they are also concrete objects that can be, bought and sold. But otherwise, indeed, there is reliance on public funding. But on the other hand, since the idea is that there is this strong relationship with the field of research and innovation, here some of these projects are also funded by research foundations, and so in the forms of collaborations with scientists. And some corporations, we can also interpret it in terms of greenwashing and so on, so that they also have their, obviously, funding for the arts, and so you cannot say that it's public money, so it's private sector. So, but they sponsor artists in residency programs and exhibitions a lot on, obviously, climate change agenda. Like Volkswagen Foundation, articles are written about, the controversy behind that, right? So that it's a car company and sponsoring the green development on the other hand within the arts. Or Robobank here, I know, also sponsored some projects. So it hasn't been my research, but big festivals like the Dutch Design Week that features also a lot of these projects has all kinds of sponsorship behind it, right? So it could be interesting to look at.
Thank you.
And Jawa, you also have a question?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was really, really fascinating. I was wondering, if you can put up the slide, the one that you started with, so kind of the principles, if I understand correctly. It was about experience. So that you mentioned that art can bring more...
After this one?
Before.
No, it's
sorry,
after.
No.
Yeah, so the perspective of the arts and design.
Yeah, arts later.
And later, a few more. 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 After this, yes.
Well, anyway. This one. I was triggered by new forms of participation in debates surrounding environment, art as embodied practice and experience. And I think this is, it shows in many of your examples that it's quite different. And I would even argue that there is perhaps art is really different to science, the traditional way of science, that in science what you learn is to approach problems in a very structured way. Like a PhD, you have all kinds of principles that make it very, but also very rigid. So it becomes very difficult to innovate for PhD students because simply the first 2 years they have to learn to copy their master, to copy the supervisor, and then to apply a certain theoretical framework. So to that extent, I would expect that you could even make a stronger point about this aspect of art, or so perhaps I'm not so much in art, much more in science, of course. But then on the other hand, I was wondering if you look at traditional art, like what is it, Michelangelo or Rubens or whatever, it turns, or Rembrandt, then to my surprise, they were also very rigid in the sense that when they were educating their own pupils, it was really, you first have to learn a copycat, basically, to be a copycat of Rembrandt, then or Rubens, then you are allowed in his atelier to basically finish so to that extent, I was wondering, so that was one question I had. The other question is that it triggered also, my background is in computer science, but also philosophy. And then in philosophy, there was a whole stream, or there is a stream of research called knowledge management. So that's a bit on the intersection between information, the computer science and philosophy, where they emphasize exactly this, that to a large extent, they argue that not science, but in particular technology, is learned in an apprenticeship. So, so they call that collective. So there's terminology also about experience. It's very much about communities of practice. The key word was communities of practice. And that is also emphasizing very much this aspect that you learn by doing, not you learn by theorizing. And I was wondering if that could be another extra layer in your scientific research to make that bridge, but it's just some thoughts.
Thank you so much. Yes, nice and useful observations to build on. So first about, let's say, artistic method, different, and its difference from the scientific. I must say there is a lot of research now about what constitutes artistic research or practice-based research, and this whole field of, let's say, artists, PhDs. So what can count as, you know, academically based research, but done in non-traditional ways, like an artwork, for instance. And I must say, well, at Leiden University, for instance, we do have a so-called Academy of Creative and Performing Arts. That is an institution within the Faculty of Humanities awarding artists PhDs. And one of the founders of the program, Henk Borgdorf, now retired, so he's been quoted a lot in this field. Yeah, exactly, because he developed his own philosophical theory of what artistic thinking brings in terms of knowledge generation, and that it also does involve rigorous methods, and what you said about communities of practice and apprenticeship. So it's true that you cannot just start out of well, somewhere on your own. So and there are certain threads. For instance, I mentioned this London-based school of thought. So it's not just the Royal College of Art, but it's these two people, the speculative design thinkers, so who educated many of their students in the same way of thinking. And then you can just see that, oh, there is this signature in a way, so that's the way they present projects, the way it's like definitely not very possible, but only plausible and speculative. Yes, that, and what you also said about practice itself, yes, and communities of not just theorists, but practitioners. That's also highly important for this field, so that we need to humble ourselves a little bit in terms of how we innovate and produce knowledge, for this matter, within the science in general. So, I mean, obviously, yes, we do need to publish and make our individual names famous, but yeah, it's also not only about abstract theory, but about how we come to that result, right? And within the field of, for instance, STS, Science and Technology Studies, you mentioned communities of practice, so it comes from this field. Or boundary object is also, I can say that all these examples are, boundary processes as well, not just objects. So what's stressed a lot is indeed this like parliament of things. Yeah, so the role of the petri dish. Yeah, so something that allows you to actually create an experiment. Obviously, a lab is full of other people, not just the head of research, right? But it's not just about people, right? It's about other species, other types of agencies. So just want to add that as well. Thanks for the question.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay.
Thank you, and Jacco.
Yes, thanks for a very nice presentation, which I'm, to some extent familiar with. I have one question on the example of the urban agriculture you gave, and I would like to say I approach the same topic more from the foresight and future studies, and there are some analogies or parallels, I think. So regarding your urban agriculture case, I was just wondering that say not every urban agriculture is really regenerative. So we have these permaculture initiatives. They are very much rooted. But I'm not sure whether I heard you touching upon that. Well, when it comes to the Netherlands, you have this agroforestry cases now quite quickly developing, which also fit really well into it. At itself, sustainable innovation transitions, including, say, the methods how to imagine that, and I don't go that far, but what I do know from the futures literature, but I do not really add that, there is, of course, quite some literature on speculative futures, also on feminist futures or alternative futures that dive quite deeply in this kind of approaches as well. You might be familiar with them, but I just would like to have mentioned that. And I think that some of these things also get back in some traditions or sub-branches of design, but Ruud might know more about that than I do, because when I come across it, it's always in relation to the colleagues of industrial design. So, what of course say, on the one hand, the imaginary and the speculative is really interesting, but also say not always that feasible. So there's always this trade-off. How do you make something that also might be, do we have to go the realistic way or the feasible way, or emphasize that, or the speculative and the creative way, or how can we combine it in a good way to get the most of these kind of processes? And I also would like to mention that, say, there is also a bit of literature also on the usability of ecological utopias for really putting it into practice. But you might also know that there is, or there was, because he's no longer among us, Marius de Geus with his book on ecological utopias, where he also, touched on these topics in a different way.
Thank you. Yeah, we should follow up indeed, and just a good comment. I don't know if I need to have an answer, so I just agree that everything you said is quite relevant. And maybe just to emphasize that I also don't want to make too strict distinctions here between, the fields. Yeah, so there is, of course, let's say an art or design practice in a strict sense, or theoretical science, applied science, field of innovation, practiced, more or less conventionally, fine. So, but then at the same time, we are talking about, human culture, and science is part of that too, or technologies. And so we don't have to necessarily label them as, strictly art, for instance. Yeah, so some of that does have this more speculative flavor and is not so applicable. but others are applicable, but at the same time do carry some artistic component within them. So it's interesting indeed to scrutinize and kind of deconstruct all these different layers and stay indeed with maybe an issue and the questions: what do these projects or methods do? What do they contribute to, and how? As opposed to, oh, do they belong to this label and box or not? So, but also what you said about utopias and foresight, since the title of my talk was about regenerative futures. So that's also interesting that different fields indeed have been studying that also within philosophy. For me, frankly, it's a bit of a new field. So I come also from philosophy, but more aesthetics and indeed art and technology, critical questions around science raised by arts. But yeah, moving into this direction more and more now. So
yeah, well, would be surely interested in the follow-up, but I also now would like to give it back to Ruud, because she also had a few points or questions, if I remember.
Yeah, I would love to dive a bit deeper in the complementarity of art-based design and more the engineering design, which is more my background. But I'm afraid we are lacking time for that. So I'll just ask. Well, I don't think it's a simple question, but
That would be a comment, maybe not a question, so I don't have to answer.
No, but circular economy is also put down as a regenerative way of thinking. Would you call that a creative vision, or is it a capitalistic vision on a regenerative future?
Oh, that's a hard one, indeed. Well, can be both, right? Depends on how exactly you implement that and how eagerly you want to fit into existing, indeed, capitalist system and to grow exponentially, or with the principles of responsibility, obviously caring about balance. Regeneratively, you do have to do it a bit differently. Well, there is a big discourse around not just regenerative cultures and futures, but economies, and how complementary, how compatible is it with capitalism? And it's a hard question. It's not so compatible.
Well, a fairly nuanced answer, I would say, and I think I agree that it depends a lot, and also if we see it as really disruptive, or that we try to fit it indeed in the current systems.
But it would be a very nice scope for a follow-up meeting or discussion in Delft. I would also, the larger circularity network or between our two faculties would be really interesting to have such a thing.
I would also recommend maybe
organize, Jaco, so go ahead.
we could invite for that, for instance, Klaas Klautenbroever, curator at the Het Nieuwe Institute and the head of ZEUP project. So he developed a concept of zoonomy, something like one of the alternative to capitalist systems. So it's a bit theoretical. So basically, it's a model for including the voices of the living within running organizations. So like touching on the rights and so on, but they work locally with many communities and organizations to implement it.
Okay, we are getting very close to 11 o'clock. Thanks for this very interesting meeting, interesting talk, fascinating discussion. Thank you all for participating, and I hope to see you next time at the Circular Industry Talks. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.